But all right, for those of you that are online, I'm afraid it's going to be hard to follow you on chat this evening because as usual, I don't have the technology up to snuff here, but I will try to view your chats as they come up. Unfortunately, they disappear quite quickly. Okay, so we are live. And Brendan, so you've been doing this for 10 years based on the Enneagram.
Yes.
And, um, and it's parolees and people that are not in prison,
Yeah, it's indigent men,
indigent men.
homeless, sometimes long-term homeless,
Uh-huh.
who decided to go into program. Quite often it's people who've been homeless for the normal reasons, for one diagnosis or another, quite often to do with addiction.
Uh-huh.
But I would say that three-quarters of the guys on the program are referred to us through the parole and probation system.
I see.
So some of them would be really long term, some of them would have been in jail for 30 years or something. I mean, some real
Yeah,
hard
really
cases.
tough. So you have a organization that you sell this service?
I volunteered the services with Catholic Charities.
Uh-huh. And do you do anything with Alcoholics Anonymous?
I attend meetings occasionally, but I used to volunteer in another outreach program. Both of these were in Baltimore City.
I see. Uh-huh. Well, I don't know if you're aware that Dr. Jung's advice was sort of the starting point, the, the match that started Alcoholics Anonymous.
I wasn't aware of that. No.
Okay, because do you know of Roland W? I think he was called Roland W. He was Bill Wilson's friend, and so Roland had an experience with Dr. Jung and spent like a year in therapy, and he kept going back on the booze, and he finally said to Dr. Jung, he finally gave up and said, "What can I do?" And Dr. Jung said, "Well, really, some people can be saved by having a religious experience." I mean, he didn't describe it quite in that way, but Roland did then have an experience, and then he went back to the U.S. and he met with Bill W., who was in very serious trouble himself at that time, and then Bill Wilson. This is Bill Wilson had an experience, a religious experience, and then it was from that they started to put together the rule, the steps for the 12-step program, and there's a quite moving book called Carl Jung and Alcoholics Anonymous, yeah, where he didn't really know that he had been responsible for that, and by the time he knew, which was not until 1961 when he was very near his own death, Bill Wilson wrote to him and told him how his advice to Roland, I think it's Roland H. maybe, had been the deciding point for him, and so it's obviously been quite effective, and so what I've taken away from it is that somehow we need a spiritual aspect to our lives. And it seems that Alcoholics Anonymous does have a methodology to give people a religious experience, okay? And in my case, I haven't been involved with Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had some dealings with a couple of alcoholics, Um, but unfortunately, this keeps tuning out. I apologize to our online viewers. Um, I'll try to keep it going. I'll do my best to keep it going. Um, anyway, actually, I didn't when I started this group 2.5 years ago. I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, I have been studying Dr. Jung's work for 30 years, and I just felt like I had a need to do something and interact with some people. And uh, it was recommended to me that I try it with Meetup, and something clicked, and so we have kept going. And this is believe it or not, this is the 109th meeting. Can you believe that? That is incredible to me. And so somehow we're taking something out of it. Do you have ideas about what we're taking out of it, Bill?
What we are taking out of it?
Yeah. Or you. Or you. This is Bill W., by the way.
I'm just taking out, I think what I've always said, it gives me a chance to talk with this in this language and in this mindset. So it sort of gives me a chance to rehearse stuff I'm working on my own anyway, or variations, or alternate ways of thinking about stuff I'm already working with. So I like it because it gives me more. It puts me in the vernacular so that I get to be familiar with it, and it's not just over there. It becomes part of me by being able to talk about it. So.
Kelly, you haven't been here for a while, so tell us why you're here.
Well, number one, because it's a group of great people. I mean, and very outgoing, and it's always a good time. I just kind of listen. You guys always get my head spinning, get me thinking. I think I sometimes get in ruts of just everyday life and kind of routine, and coming here gets me out of that and back into a place where it's like little seeds in the road that like maybe want to pull out a book and read something, or you just kind of that curiosity, I guess, and get me thinking. You all are very wise. Everybody here is very, very wise. Really learn a lot from you guys.
Well, good. Very good. How about you, Des?
It pulls me out of the kind of in a rut of your habits, and it grounds me and also reconnects me to just my humanity.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I do. John.
Well, I find it just fascinating to learn things that he delved into and discovered through his own work and his own deep companionship with the unconscious, and it motivates me to do the same because I've gotten so much out of that, especially the unexpected creative volume that comes out from that, which I wasn't expecting that, and so for me it's a personal development kind of interest.
So, Brendan, as I probably said on the second session, the first session that I had, I was alone, except I did it on Periscope. So I had 33 people online around the world, including somebody from Argentina that first night. But from the second session on, there's always been somebody else here. And Dr. Jung was about circling the center and getting closer and closer to the depth of the unconscious, okay, to the deepest part of the unconscious, which he described as the self, the archetype of the self, which is also sometimes called the God image and sometimes called the greater personality. Okay, so in Jungian psychology, there are two centers. There's the ego, which is everything that you have in consciousness, ever. Okay, that's the ego. And the unconscious is everything else. Okay, and so it includes things like keeping your heart going and your lungs going, but it also is the source of your dreams, and it's really the boss. Okay, because if you don't do what yourself wants, it has a life of its own, which is unconscious, but it has it. And if you don't do what it wants, it'll whack you. Okay, one way or another. It broke my leg one day. so, so, and I only know that after years, but also, I know from personal experience that I've had a number of visions, okay, including a vision of Mephistopheles himself, okay, and I know how those are generated, okay, they're a psychogenic experience that is caused by emotion, and I know that because my 22-year-old daughter, now 44-year-old daughter, but 22-year-old daughter, fell in with Christian fundamentalists in Russia, American Christian fundamentalists in Russia. And when she came back, I took her out to dinner. It was on her 22nd birthday it happened. And we had a lovely dinner, just the two of us, reminiscing about some exploits that we had had over her lifetime. And at the end of the dinner, she said, "Well, Dad, I'm sorry to say this, but I think you're going to hell," quote unquote.
We talked about it. We are concerned.
And she was right, okay, because that very evening, Mephistopheles plopped down in the seat next to me in the car, and I cut the Faustian bargain, and the Faustian bargain I cut, which has been criticized by my online following, is that he could have my immortal soul, provided that none of my daughters would think that of me during my lifetime.
And they would have been right.
And they would have been right. And so 20 years now, he's kept his bargain, right? And so I've been criticized because I cut too easy a bargain with Mephistopheles, but the point is, when you're driving at 65 miles an hour down a superhighway, and suddenly the devil is in the seat next to you, you want to find a way out of that situation as quickly as possible. And yeah, go ahead.
Are you being trolled?
Pardon?
Are you being trolled?
No, I'm not being droll. I'm being very serious. I mean, these are actual events that occurred to me, and that
Okay, so you perceive these actual things.
my memory of the event is that it was an actual event
Not
in my life.
and it's some kind of delusion,
Pardon?
some kind of delusion, some kind of.
No, I do understand it as a vision that was psychogenically created. Okay, and nevertheless an event. Okay, so as we start to talk with you about Dr. Jung, I want to emphasize this book, which is Answer to Joe by C.G. Jung. Okay, and I particularly want to emphasize it for a couple of things he says in paragraph 751 and 752 of this book. And so a couple points he makes, and these are central to Jungian psychology. and he's forcing these out of himself after himself suffering with this stuff for 45 years. Okay, so he was really analyzing it for 45 years himself. And so he says, what people overlook or seem unable to understand is the fact that I regard the psyche as real. They believe only in physical facts and must consequently come to the conclusion that either the uranium itself or the laboratory equipment created the atom bomb. That is no less absurd than the assumption that a non-real psyche is responsible for it. Okay, so if we look around in this room, since there are no actual potted plants, they're all false. Everything in this room had its origination in the psyche of man. Okay, even you, because you were a twinkle in your father's eye at some point.
And sometimes women as well.
As well as having an origination in the Big Bang or whatever theory you want to talk about.
Sure.
From the origin of all species.
Exactly, and all religions.
There's a continuity.
Right.
Of the atom. The atom is the same. It's just the
Right.
shape.
Okay, absolutely.
The atom is a concept.
Okay. So I'm hoping our online followers can hear. I'm doing my best. Okay. So the other point in the very next paragraph, 752, is, let's see. So he's talking about the assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. Okay, and that was a papal bull from Pope Pius the 12th in 1950. He says, I consider it to be the most important religious event since the Reformation. It is a petroscandale, which is a stumbling block for the unpsychological mind. How can such an unfounded assertion as the bodily reception of the Virgin into heaven be put forward as worthy of belief? But the method which the Pope uses in order to demonstrate the truth of the dogma makes sense to the psychological mind, because it bases itself firstly on the necessary prefigurations, and secondly, on the tradition of religious assertions reaching back more than 1,000 years. Clearly, the material evidence for the existence of this psychic phenomenon is more than sufficient. It does not matter at all that a physically impossible fact is asserted, because all religious assertions are physical impossibilities. Okay? All religious assertions are physical impossibilities. If they were not so, they would be, as I said earlier, necessarily be treated in the textbooks of natural science. But religious statements, without exception, have to do with the reality of the psyche and not with the reality of the physics, the physical world.
So are you saying that I should be, I'm prone right now to either leaving the table or being a bit skeptical and thinking, a bit crazy. But what you're saying is because, and I can respect the fact that your psyche is real. On my side, everybody's psyche is real. And because psyches are real, you're saying that psychic phenomena are real then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Like I honor your feelings.
What was the story?
You have a feeling. Is a feeling a real thing? But it's real to you.
Exactly. That's the point.
And so, yeah, I can, as an empathetic person, I can validate and honor your feelings, although I cannot feel them.
Precisely. Okay. So that's what Dr. Jung would concur with that. And so, his point is that, all religions are true. Okay. With that assumption. Okay, if you accept the fact that all religious statements are true, but they're true in the psyche and not in the physical world. That makes a lot of sense, okay, because now, 500 years after the Reformation, and since the scientific method has come into us, we know that there's no heaven up there. We know that there's no heaven or hell below our feet. Where are they? They're here. They're in our heart and in our psyche. And I understand that that's sort of a stunning statement and thought for people who have been educated as Christians, let's say, to think of heaven as up there and so on. But this is the problem with Christianity has atrophied, is that it hasn't kept up with the fact that these are things that are happening to many people, okay, but they happen in the psyche, they don't happen in the physical world. When you sell it as a reality, now we have a whole new generation. Okay, fundamentalism came along in the late 20th century and brought people back into some churches, right? But, oh, by the way, the children of the people that came back at that time, they're all leaving now because they're saying, what is this bull? And these people that are playing with snakes or so on and so on, okay, every so often one of them gets bitten, and dies. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Skip, isn't it really the case that what he's saying is that there is an objective reality and there's a subjective reality,
Exactly.
but neither is superior.
Yeah.
So there is no aura around one or the other in terms of
Correct.
objective reality. Well, Bill doesn't believe there's such a thing as objective reality, I think, right? But there are two common viewpoints, that there are two kinds of reality, and that we're saying is that they're complementary, but they're not. There's no dominance of one over the other in terms of its validity.
What do you mean by objective? Because when Jung talks about objective unconscious, he's really talking about the sort of like the animal template in which we're all kind of, examples of. So there's objectivity in the sense that there's an underlying pattern of instincts, or and so in that sense, there's an objective reality. But as far as the objective reality of dualism, it's me. It's a convention. It's thanks.
That looks good, Bill.
That's you?
No, that's her, right behind you. Thanks.
So, Brendan, you said that you thought about getting up and just leaving the table. So, I wonder if you'd expand on your objection and what it might have been. Hi, Nancy. Welcome. We have a good group tonight. We have 9 online and 7 at the table.
I was thinking that this group would explore real things.
Such a
What real things? See, because we can consider the psyche as real, so.
And that, to me, is I'm always thinking that if somebody comes to me symptomatic of something, somebody presents with some kind of issue, I always think there's something going on. I validate them, their feeling, whatever's happening, but I always think there's a reason for it. There's some, something has produced this need to come and see me now rather than 3 weeks ago. Something is happening now.
Okay. So that's a causal principle that you're
Yes.
thinking.
Yes.
Okay. And so that misses one half of Dr. Jung's research, which is acausal. Okay, but go ahead. I don't want to.
No.
Something we'll
all right,
come
so
back
you know,
to.
please come back to acausality because I never heard that before either.
Right.
Because so then I think, well, maybe we can reframe this. What do you think happened, or what is going on? I was speaking to someone today who's just living in the pits of despair, but doesn't think that she needs any kind of assistance. So, well, if that's the case, why are you telling her? Why are you sharing this with her?
Is she an artist?
No, that's a good question. That's a good question.
Because then
So I always think-
she doesn't need any.
So I always think there's a reason for it, there's a causality.
A reason for her despair.
Yeah.
Saturn just went, retrograde and went square on her Mars.
I was gonna
There
say,
you go.
Is Mercury in retrograde?
Okay.
I'm just curious. Is Mercury in retrograde? You're the person to ask.
Oh, I don't know. I think it went,
I think the
Direct
issue,
on the 6th.
Brendan, may be that it's acausal. Okay. In other words, it's in the unconscious. Okay. In some sense, there might be a cause, but it's so deeply buried that not only she, but you and even she can't get to it.
And we can't get to it right now.
Okay.
It's take a relationality. There's going to have to be something going on.
Right. Okay. So one.
but even if you intellectually decide what caused something, it doesn't matter because you've got to experience it. You've got to experience it in such a way that you can let it go. Or you can let it transform itself. You can't just think about it and say, oh, well, I took care of that. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
No. But I think one of the things that we do about symptoms very often is we don't like our symptoms. And we go to people to try and relieve ourselves of our symptoms. So that's the big mistake we make. I think what we have to do is
Drugs.
deeply experience.
Yes.
I agree.
Suffer the consequences of our symptoms.
And
Then we'll get it.
And mind you, I'm not a mental health professional, okay? But I've been studying it for 32 years now. And what I've taken out of it is that what we are doing is expanding our ability to cope with the world, let's say, to learn. Dr. Jung called this the individuation process, but that's not really relevant here. But the idea is to expand your thinking. So Des used to come to this group a couple years back, and she would say the next week, "Oh my God, I had such dreams afterward,"
Terrified for tonight. It's been a while since I've been with you guys.
So her mind would be spinning, right?
We're her nightmare group.
Right.
Say that, just the spinning mind that won't calm
Makes me
down.
think of Rosemary's Baby.
Okay, I never said Rosemary's Baby group.
So I'm sorry we can't do chat tonight, and I haven't been seeing any chats come up.
I work in mental health, and I sort of like have a background, trauma in my background, and I do think that immersion and sadness and grief and experiencing that and literally just experiencing that can be helpful, in a form of desensitization, and just kind of coming to accept it. But I think it also takes like a psychologically hardy person and stuff to be able to do
Right.
that. I think it's hard for some people because, some clients are better with stuff like that than others are.
Well, I think the experience is important. And, I mean, even in initiation ceremonies, like among the Swahili or the Maasai, they would take a 12-year-old kid and stick him out in front of the men and allow a tiger to attack him. And he would have to defend himself with a spear. And the reason was that they wanted him to experience that fear so that he could then be tougher later on, right? And and so, and to realize that he could survive, right?
If he did.
If he did, right? But I'm not sure that they would just let the tiger eat him. I don't know. I'm not an expert on
If
the
it's a
subject.
primitive enough culture, there would be consequences to shirking from that challenge.
Right, challenge. They would have
Yeah.
thrown you out of the tribe, and then you might not survive.
And you, in Australian Paleolithic cultures, you may not survive the walkabout, which is where you test your skills alone out in the wilderness.
Right. So in a sense, you have to experience it. Okay. And one way to think about it in terms of this causality issue is what Dr. Jung called synchronicity, which is acausal. It's an acausal connecting principle. That was the subtitle of his essay called Synchronicity. Okay, synchronicity and acausal connected principle. And so everything in Jungian psychology is about opposites. Okay, so there are some things that are causal. Okay, like I can tell you that my experience with Mephistopheles was causal. There was a direct cause. Okay, my daughter, out of the clear blue, accused me, and then she left for the evening after a beautiful night, and I'm sitting there going, what the heck did that mean? And it affected me very emotionally, and so I know that psychogenic experience came from that emotion. Okay, that was causal. Okay, but the fact that it was Mephistopheles, and it was the Mephistopheles that I imagined when I read Faustus 30 years earlier, was sort of acausal. That was just stuff in my mind that came up because of that emotional experience. But that doesn't make it not real. It was real. Okay, I mean, Mephistopheles was in fact,
Well, I mean, it's important. It was important to you,
at that moment, it was very important to
and
me.
it's important to us, and it's important to your listeners because a lot of people, a lot of people have had similar things happen to them and doubt themselves.
Right. And I'm sure lots of people came into the church because they had similar experiences. Okay, because the pastors were describing the devil, what he might look like, and then speak of the devil, and he appears, right? He does appear, in fact. Okay, and so the acausal side is there's a hook in your psyche that's waiting for something. In fact, there are many of them. Okay, there are hundreds of thousands of them, and they're just waiting for something to happen. And something happens, and all of a sudden you say, "Oh boy, that's a synchronous event." Um, and that's a synchronicity, and that's like a religious experience. Okay, and so there are now 819 videos on this YouTube channel, and I've actually put video of some of these experiences that I've had on video with this group on there in a playlist called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious. And one happened with Bill, right, sitting right here at this table. And, I had an experience in, I don't know, the mid-1990s where I went to the Boston Museum and I saw a modern art exhibition. And I've never been a big fan of modern art, never really understood it, but there were two things that affected me that day. One was I walked into a room and there was a 3 times normal size table. So imagine this table is 3 times normal size and the chairs are 3 times normal size. So you walk under this table and it's like being 3 years old again. And I was immediately taken back to the feeling of being 3 years old again. And
Wow.
that was a very powerful experience. But the other one was I had never liked, and also I'd never had an experience in an art museum of weeping. You know, some people go to an art museum and they're very affected by it, but I'm sort of a rational kind of guy, so it never really affected me that way. And especially not Jackson Pollock, okay, because I said, you know, I had seen postcards of Jackson Pollock. So, you know, I immediately just burst into tears, and I mean, I was seriously weeping. I looked at this and broke down, and I had no clue why. No clue whatsoever. And Jackson Pollock in his strip paintings had not made any image that you could relate to. And so for 20 years, I didn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. I knew that I'd had that experience, but I had no clue why. And we're sitting at this table, and I had described the colors of the image, and Bill just said two words, olive drab, and boom, I connected this to the death of my in Vietnam, and that's what it has been about. That I was really mourning his death, and so that's a asynchronous thing. It's, you know, there was a hook there because I was waiting to understand what that weeping bout had been about, but I didn't know what it had been about. And with two words, Bill just put me in it, and boom, it was instant.
It was either that or I was going to have to slap him.
What a choice.
I barely knew the guy.
Somehow we.
I love that. Needs to have. I mentioned before, is it important? It doesn't matter if it's important, does it? It doesn't need to have any significance or any meaning.
What is